Titanfall 2 shows how the best design in the world can't make up for terrible planning. From its visually flashy single-player campaign to its intense arena shooter multiplayer, Titanfall 2 hits all the notes you'd hope for in a twitchy shooter in 2016. It has a story mode that manages to be grand, taking time when it needs to, but generally going as fast as it possibly can to match the ridiculously fast gameplay. And the multiplayer is filled out this time around with more weapons, mods, and titans, with a long-term plan from the developers to support the game with free maps and modes. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that you just don't see often in a gaming landscape where microtransactions, DLC, and season passes are the norm. But all of that is threatened by maybe the worst launch day of any game in my recent memory, putting Titanfall 2 between two giants of the genre with little hope of consolidating the game's flailing player numbers before they drop off. And while I feel like this is definitely a fantastic follow-up to the original game, I worry that Titanfall 2 is already being swept under the rug, and that makes it hard to recommend without reservation. But before I get into more of the logistics of this game's botched launch, let's talk about what works and doesn't work with Titanfall 2's actual design. As a sophomore effort from developer Respawn, a team that was born from the ashes of the original Call of Duty Modern Warfare team, Titanfall 2 pretty much nails everything that the original was criticized for. The first game didn't have a real single-player campaign, and what we get here in the sequel is pretty standard, but still really well done. The player slips into the boots of Jack Cooper, a member of a militia force that's waging interstellar mech wars against the evil IMC. After being left for dead on the battlefield, Cooper wakes up to find his captain dying after fighting an IMC merc group called the Apex Predators. Cooper has to take control of his captain's Titan named BT, and players spend the next 4 to 5 hours blazing through a whirlwind of a campaign fighting the Koopa Kids, the Apex Predators, and unraveling a plot to unleash a planet-killing superweapon on the militia homeworld. Most of Titanfall 2's story seems ripped straight out of the Star Wars playbook. Cooper is your standard issue everyman with some humorous back-and-forth exchanges with BT sprinkled throughout serious story beats.
Pilot, are you alright?
Barely. That was a meat grinder. You okay?
I'm undamaged. However, I do not believe this is a food processing plant.
There's really no explanation for why the IMC and militia are fighting besides militia good, IMC bad, and there's really no outstanding character work to grab onto here, though at least the Apex Predators are reasonably colorful bad guys.
Lisk has put a high price on your head, pilot. Dead or alive. That makes you worth something to me.
More disappointing is that BT is what you would expect out of a robot companion, and his relationship to Cooper is just a B-level buddy cop movie script if one of the cops was a robot. Not that I was really expecting a riveting narrative with this game. No, what we have with Titanfall 2's campaign is great level design, set-piece battles, and one-on-one boss fights that'll make you a little bit more prepared for the multiplayer meat grinder. But thankfully, the campaign's actual gameplay is all really well designed and paced. Even though Titanfall is one of the fastest first-person shooters to come out of the past decade, you're never rushing through the game at an unmanageable pace or forced out of the action for too long by cutscenes. In fact, there's a lot of opportunity to take in the game's sci-fi vistas and impressive sense of scale before rushing off to the next battle. I was reminded a lot of Halo 3 in terms of the grandness of Titanfall 2. That's one aspect of the single player that absolutely comes through. At first, you feel like a small part of an embattled militia fighting against a much more powerful Imperial force, and as the game progresses, you become stronger and more dangerous as you get a better feel for the game's ridiculously tight movement controls, level designs, and of course the Titans. Make no bones about it, Titanfall 2 feels amazing to play. Your sprint speed, the crouching slide, the distance of your double jump, the length of time you can wall run before falling to the ground, it's all so intuitive that I found myself pulling complicated maneuvers out of reflex before too long. Even when I think back to other Twitch shooters like Quake 3 or Unreal Tournament, I don't remember those feeling quite as streamlined or friendly to those who hadn't put hundreds of hours into the game. Just 3 hours into Titanfall 2 and I was blasting through hallways shooting assault rifles mid-air as I came down on enemies with a falling dropkick, throwing thermite ninja stars into groups, and then jumping into BT to launch missiles at 9 more enemies that had just come into range. And it all feels so natural and reflexive that it's more of an extension of your motor functions than pre-planned routes. Of course, level design also helps to make the movement feel fluid, and Respawn made the wise choice to design most of the single player with continuous motion in mind. You'll see a lot of cylindrical or parallel wall configurations, and plenty of verticality to complement your agility on foot. There's a few jumping puzzles here and there, but for the most part the emphasis is on making the player feel fast and responsive. That's why one of my favorite levels ended up being the factory. It would have been really easy for Respawn to just make this section nothing more than a roller coaster, but they force you off every so often to break up the ride with quick combat, wall run sequences, and jump puzzles, and then culminate the entire level with an arena fight and Titan battle. It's a really thrilling level. And even when you're in BT, levels are typically designed with movement and agility in mind. BT is obviously heavier and feels every bit of it, but a nice dash move helps you maneuver in and out of dogfights. Instead of using verticality to your advantage, you want to flank around buildings and obstacles when you're in a Titan, and most of the weapon loadouts that you'll find throughout the campaign reinforce that by letting you control ground. Take the Scorch loadout, for example. You've got a flame wall that you can shoot out directly at enemies, and it does a fair bit of damage, but it's more advantageous to trap other Titans in a corner with a flammable gas cloud and then use the flame wall to light the whole thing up. Even when you find the North Star Titan loadout, which gives you 2 hover mechanics to use, the game warns you that it's a gamble. You immediately expose yourself to more fire when you hover, but the Titan's ultimate weapon is so devastating that it's a gamble worth taking every once in a while, but the emphasis is still definitely on the ground and controlling where your Titan and other Titans are going to go. Of course, Titanfall also has some of the best feeling weapons in the business, and I'd expect no less from the team that made Call of Duty. The campaign puts an emphasis on switching out weapons instead of holding on to them, so you pretty much have to use every single one of them at least once. If there's one gripe I have about them, it's that there's a lot of machine guns that seemed virtually identical to me, and I wasn't particularly surprised by much of the ordnance that I was picking up, besides the fire stars. Oh, those fire stars. I read a few reviews of Titanfall 2's campaign mode, and I had to say that I'm kinda surprised at how well it was all received. I won't lie, I had a ton of fun, and there were plenty of awesome moments in the campaign, but I wanted a bit more out of it, a bit more reason to care about the characters and the stakes of the war with the IMC, a bit more context and time to get to know this universe. As it is, this is a fantastic 5-hour romp that deals more in raw emotions and gameplay expression than cerebral story beats or deeper character attachment, which still makes Titanfall 2 better than most of its peers. As for the multiplayer, Respawn also tried to address a lot of issues, but I'm not sure if they were all great choices or not. Some of the more noticeable changes were in map design, which tries to mash together wider spaces for Titan dogfights and tighter, more flowing buildings and obstacles for pilots. The verticality of maps has been limited pretty severely in Titanfall 2, and while that frustrated me at times, I didn't get picked off by snipers nearly as often because of it. The big motif of the multiplayer map seems to be meat grinder choke points. There's just a lot of them in a lot of different maps. Because of that and the fact that your Titan is much more fragile this time around, forming a pack with other Titans is a must. Most matches of attrition, which is essentially team deathmatch that I played, came down to whatever team could effectively run the choke points with 2 or 3 Titans in close formation. And that also meant that the new battery mechanic, where you can hop out of your Titan and grab batteries left behind by other destroyed Titans to heal yourself or teammates, hardly ever worked out for me because another opponent's Titan was there to blow me to pieces nearly every time. It also seems like Titanfall 2 gives you fewer Titans per match, incentivizing them essentially in the same way that kill streaks happen in Call of Duty. You can technically wait for your Titan to be ready on a timer, but you might be lucky to get even one during a typical match if you do. You also have boosts that unlock as you gain kills that replace the burn cards from the last game, so at least you have something to accelerate the timer if you're not the most dexterous player in the world. Now, every pilot loadout has a tactical item slot that basically functions as your class. The Stimpack loadout lets you run twice as fast for a short period and lends itself pretty well to submachine guns and shotguns, while the cloaking loadout is a natural for snipers. I found myself using the Stimpack and grappling hook options most often, but there's definitely a lot here for players of different persuasions. Generally though, Titanfall has always been about speed, and this game is no different. Even more so than Call of Duty, I found myself getting kills and getting killed only seconds into a match. I don't know what the console experience is like, but on PC, Titanfall 2 is already pretty hardcore. There are a lot of players who seemingly came straight from the last game and picked this up with no problem. Thankfully, there's a lot of options for customization this time around, which was a huge sticking point with the original game. You'll level up and unlock more guns, paint jobs, scopes, items, secondary items, player effects, just so much stuff all the time. And you earn merits as you play that you can spend to unlock upgrades out of order. You can tell that Respawn really took the lack of variety in the first game seriously here, because there's almost too much to take in. If I had to sum up the multiplayer in a word, it's pure. With Titanfall 2, Respawn has claimed the fast-paced arena shooter market for themselves. I haven't played a competitive shooter this frantic since Quake, and if you're looking for a lightning-fast game that'll test your reflexes, I don't know of a better one to recommend than this. If you're looking for a simulation mech game, you're still going to be wanting something else, but if you're more than happy to hop in a user-friendly robot and start blasting stuff, you'll be thrilled like I was. And if I were to give this entire game, campaign and multiplayer, a final word based only on its design, I'd say this is clearly the best shooter of the year, hands down. But there's still that big elephant in the room that I touched on earlier. The game's publisher, EA, made a stunning mistake to release this game between Battlefield 1 and Call of Duty Infinite Warfare. Player counts are very low, just a few weeks out from launch. Now, some EA executives have claimed that they're not worried and that Titanfall 2's free maps and modes down the line will help foster a community, but God, I don't know. It seems to me like there's a lot of hubris on the part of EA to release this game right in the thick of a shooter-filled holiday season. I gotta think that name recognition alone is gonna draw more people to Battlefield or Call of Duty than Titanfall. Look, I'm already staring at player count numbers that are downright scary, and there are reports that the game vastly undersold in the UK. Now, I'm sure that there's going to be a hardcore contingent of people who swear by this game and keep it alive in some form, but for those of us who aren't that dedicated, it's easy to see Titanfall 2 becoming just as hardcore and unfriendly as its predecessor did in the last year of its life. Already, some modes are practically ghost towns with a couple hundred people playing them. That's just crazy. You know, there's a reason why I've kept playing Rocket League for more than a year now, and it's that the player base is big enough to accommodate players of all skill levels. I'm not some sort of ace, but I can still hang in there pretty well and have fun no matter what. With Titanfall 2, I'm already losing more often than not, so what's that going to look like in 6 months when the player base has gotten even sharper and more used to all the guns, maps, and Titans? I just can't fathom how I'll be able to stay competitive. And hey, maybe Titanfall 2 will gain players as the developers churn out new content. We saw that happen with Rainbow Six Siege, and it seems to be doing just fine. And maybe the developers will bolster numbers by allowing crossplay, but that introduces its own problems as part of the audience uses a controller and part a mouse and keyboard. It's sad because I have no doubt that a March release would have been way more successful for this game. I mean, Titanfall 2 is pretty distinct because of, the Titans, but it also shares a lot of DNA with Call of Duty. It's hard for me to see how it's distinctive enough to foster a large player base. And maybe some Call of Duty players will give this a shot, but I can't see them coming to it anytime soon while Infinite Warfare is still hot. And Battlefield 1 goes for a completely different experience, so it's also hard for me to see those players coming over to this game. Nowadays gamers can get pretty riled up by delays, but this is one situation where that might have been the best course of action. I've seen this game go from 14,000 players in a given night to 4,500 or less. And as much as I'd like to say that this game's quality is going to carry it over the top and drive more people to it, I just don't think it will.